Ryan, yes, you are here first. 1,000 pine points to you. Brenda, 500. Thanks for being here. Worldview Detective, 250. And Dale Allison, 10,000 pine points. It's the most, I think I've given maybe one higher than that once. But only a couple times in history have I ever given out so many pine points. But Dale Allison, you get 10,000. Why? Because you made me smile. You made me smile because you're demonstrating the things I've been saying for years. That the reason why most Christians believe the resurrection happened has nothing to do with, well, I shouldn't say nothing, has little to do with the historical evidence. And Dale Allison, a New Testament historian who teaches at Princeton, is it? Basically admits that. Well, I say basically because I'll let you hear for yourself what he says. I made some notes here. Basically, Mike Licona interviewed him. 4 segments. All 4 were about 45 minutes each. And so if you listen to the whole thing, it's a pretty long thing. I'm going to try to summarize the key points that I think both Christians and non-Christians alike would find interesting. And one thing that I've said for years is that usually people who believe in the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ had some type of amazing spiritual type experience when they're younger. Or I guess it could be older as well. And I think that puts them in a slot. It puts them in a worldview slot. And so, of course, they're more open to miracles like the resurrection. But I also think that it makes it extremely difficult, and I think Dale Allison does a great job at lowering his biases, but it makes it extremely difficult to see the evidence objectively. So I just want to play a couple of clips of Dale Allison in his own words talking about his spiritual experiences. Hopefully I have these timestamps correct.
And I was in my parents' backyard one summer evening under the Kansas night sky, and something remarkable happened. And I suppose people would call it a mystical experience, which means it's ineffable, which means I can't tell you anything about it and make any sense at all. But I did believe then, and I still believe now, that I ran into God or God ran into me in some way that has never happened before or since. And that turned my life upside down.
Or since. Interesting.
Down?
Turned his life upside down. Remember how I often say Christians mostly believe because of some experience they had at summer camp or whatever?
And what I instantly started doing was talking to everybody about God, because that's the word that I had for this thing that had happened to me. And in my time and place, which is Wichita, Kansas, early 1970s.
Wichita, Kansas. I wonder if he lives, or where he's from is close to our head office there, the Pinecreek head office.
70s. The only people who want to talk about God were evangelical Christians. So I actually did end up in a very conservative church for probably about a year or.
Okay, so there's one. He had some type of mystical experience, he calls it God. When he was younger, he was living with his parents. So my guess is it's in his, dare I say, his late teens, like I often say. Okay, now here's another clip from part 3. That's part 2. Part 3, where he talks about miracles. I'm going to start it at 1:30.
Don't find the philosophical discussions of miracles to be very interesting. For me, it is an empirical question. And for me, Gregory of Nyssa was on target, that we tend to decide what's possible through our own experience. So I don't know what your hearers are going to do with this, but my experience has been exceedingly strange. So has the experience of members of my immediate family. So let me just say a couple of things here. Once, I believe that twice. And by the way, I don't think anyone should believe me. You really shouldn't.
Don't worry, most people don't.
But I believe that twice. I'm firmly convinced that twice I saw the future. I saw things before they happened, once in a dream, once while wide awake. That's not supposed to happen. It doesn't fit anything in my high school or college textbooks. It doesn't fit the paradigm of reductionistic materialism that many scientists ascribe to. But for me, far more interesting than that, and we probably haven't ever talked about this before, and I'm going to be my description here is going to be thin, okay? But I do believe that I once saw a physical object in one part of a room blink out of existence and appear on the other side of the room. Now, I don't think anyone should believe me. I really don't. For all you know.
But it's eyewitness testimony, is it not? You saw something there, and then you saw it disappear and then go to the other side of the room. Eyewitness testimony. We shouldn't believe you. Should we believe Paul then? But remember, this is all just a setup for, I think, how the paradigm he is in, so how he views the evidence. But to his credit, and you're going to see this later, he realizes that that the Gospels are not reliable. Oh, do I say it that way? Yeah, I'm just going to say it that way. I got to do it in the form of a comparison. Compared to guys like Mike Licona, Dale Ellison is more like Pinecreek than Dale Ellison is to Mike Licona. I really believe that. Okay, so this again is now Mike Licona and Dale Allison talking about more spiritual experiences, which I think basically clouds how they view the resurrection. This is in part 3, 31 minutes, about there.
And so I raised a number of things like well-evidenced near-death experiences, veridical apparitions, extreme answered prayer, paranormal phenomena. I even tried to give an example of each of them.
Oh, by the way, thank you for the donation. Experiments in prebiotic chemistry. If there's no demonstrable mechanism for how God created the universe, created first life, then it's just imaginary. Thank you. Well, thank you for the donation. Yeah, that's a question I often ask is, well, how exactly did God create the universe? It's a question that's screaming for an explanation. What is the exact mechanism? But back to spiritual experiences and why I think people believe the historical evidence is powerful. It's through these personal experiences.
To those, I know a girl, Kim Earhart, who she comes from a family where her grandmother and mother were witches. They were involved in the occult, and she has actually witnessed some demonic stuff. I mean, she's given me firsthand testimony of things that occurred while with a Ouija board and things. And it's like, okay, someone can just dismiss that. But then I've got a friend named Gary Hamrick, who's a pastor in Houston right now, a good friend of mine. And when he was in Maui, he experienced all kinds of demonic stuff. He saw, and some of these were in a group of 3 people, really bizarre stuff, the kind of stuff that make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. I've experienced some paranormal stuff that I would...
Although I don't think I've ever heard Mike Licona state exactly what he has experienced.
I would interpret as demonic. When you mention this kind of stuff to atheists, they just think that you're crazy, but they've just never experienced them themselves. Once you've experienced some of this stuff, then you know that atheism is false.
Then you know atheism is false. See, the belief in God for guys like Dale Ellison and Mike Licona, it's like, it has nothing to do with the Kalam cosmological argument, the contingency argument, all these arguments. It's a personal experience. That's where it starts. And then what do you know? The evidence found in the historical record, in quotes, in the New Testament at least, start to look very believable. Okay, now what exactly does Dale Ellison believe about the resurrection? That's in part 2. So again, this is a summary of the 4 parts that Mike Licona did with him. Timestamp 720.
I remember when I was writing my book on the resurrection, I sent you an email. We corresponded a little bit because I was under the impression that you didn't think Jesus had been raised physically in that book, and you clarified that for me. There were a couple of things, and I remember you saying, yeah, you thought it was a little confusing the way you had written in that, but
let me interrupt you, Mike. In my own defense, I was sometimes deliberately unclear because I was still debating in my own mind what to think. There's no point I don't think there's any point of being clear when you're not clear.
Yeah.
or being dogmatic when you're not dogmatic.
Well, I think in 2005, I think you referred to yourself as a I haven't read that book in over a decade, but I think you referred to yourself as a cryptic deist
Yes,
and an
and
agnostic.
so I don't remember the agnostic thing. Maybe agnostic about certain historical conclusions, but I have seen that cited several times, and that's just like what you were referring to in the previous discussion we had. You couldn't believe you said something in a debate, but you really did. I'm not a cryptic deist. I've never been a cryptic deist. I don't know what the heck I was thinking. I think I was just being poetical and saying sometimes I look at the world and wonder where God is. I think that's all I was doing. But I am in no way a deist, and so that was a mistaken use of the English language, and it has no place in this second book.
Yeah, I didn't.
You know what's interesting is I'm not going to play it, but in one spot he talks about why he writes books rather than go on podcasts, although he's on Mike's podcast right now. But he said the advantage of writing books over debating and being on podcasts, just speaking engagements, is because you can get your thoughts correct, and you can have time to think about exactly what you want to say, put it pen to paper. But here he's admitting that I don't know why I said that in one of my books. I'm not that. And it's like, even after deliberating, and I think even authors admit this, even after thinking about exactly the right way to write something down, a year or two later, you look back on it and said, oh, I shouldn't have said it that way. I should have said it this way. This is why I think, just for goodness sakes, because of technology, you can put your face on a screen and tell people about your research, about what you've learned, and how you did it, and so forth. That's my way of poo-pooing books again.
I don't recall reading that in your manuscript. Okay, so it is a good book. This new book it's a challenging one. Like I said, there are occasions in it when it made me feel uncomfortable, but you do a great job of defending your position. Give us an outline, a basic outline of the contents of that book.
Well, this book has 4 parts. Very simply, the first part is the introduction. The second part is historical critical.
Okay, I'm going to go to 1720. I think that's when he finally says what he thinks. Did Jesus rise from the dead? Yeah, that's it. So, Dale Ellison, did Jesus rise from the dead in bodily form?
So the question I'm asking you here is, do you think Jesus rose from the dead? Yes, no, or yes or no with qualifications?
Okay, so it's yes with qualifications. Okay, so here's the first thing, and I don't know what's wrong with me, but it seems to me that in this context, that's not a question I am interested in. So in this context, all that matters.
Who does that sound like? He sounds like John Dominic Crossan. You're not interested in the question if Jesus rose bodily from the dead as a Christian?
Is my arguments, right? So every week, this must happen to you too. Every week, somebody emails me and says, did Jesus rise from the dead? And I could answer, yes, sincerely, Dale Allison, right? But that would be unilluminating. Why is that unilluminating? Because it doesn't really matter what I think. All that matters is my reasons for thinking what I think.
Well, that's true. But part of who you are is the reasons and the way you think and what you say about what you think.
So from my point of view, in this context, I am nothing but my arguments. I am nothing but my arguments, no more, no less. If my arguments are good, then pay attention to my arguments. If my arguments are bad, well, then too bad for me. But I'm just my arguments. Who cares what I think? So that's my first qualification.
Well, you're a New Testament historian. I would think people would care about what you think about the historical record of Jesus' resurrection.
And I hope that makes a little sense. The second thing I have to say is that this is written from a halfway house on a journey, and I haven't gotten to the end. It's a dispatch from a halfway house. So that may seem silly given that I've been worrying about this since the 1970s, but my thoughts don't rest. They don't stop. I'm still learning. I still have new ideas. And I actually say at one point, I didn't finish this book. I just stopped because I could go on forever and ever and ever. I really just abandoned it. Okay. I just abandoned the project because it was getting long. As you said earlier, it's long. I could keep doing more and more things. So I'm still on a journey. I'm still thinking. I'm still trying to figure things out. And I think that's okay. And here's the other thing. And I developed this in the overture, which is part of the introduction. I say there, and I'm being honest, that I am not a single thinking mind. I'm not a monad. I am a multiple personality, and there are different selves within me, and these selves don't agree on everything. They get along well.
Okay, what is he getting at here? So he believes that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, bodily, I think, but he's admitting that he's almost schizophrenic on the idea that a part of him doesn't believe it. Maybe just a greater part does believe it.
They're amiable, but they don't agree. So one self,
The name of the book he's talking about is The Resurrection of The Resurrection of Jesus, Apologetics, Polemics, History. Due March 11th, 2021. There's a free plug for you, Dale.
Part of me is my Christian self. This is the self that writes Luminous Dusk and Night Comes. This is the guy who says his prayers every morning and who teaches seminary students and goes to church. Okay, so that's that guy. But there is a second guy in there who is a critical historian, and he really is full of doubts.
There we go.
And he thinks Origen was right. Origen, in his commentary on...
Now, here's a New Testament historian who's full of doubts on the bodily resurrection of Jesus.
John somewhere says, one of the hardest things to do is to show that
Sorry,
something
Catherine.
happened, even if it did happen. Even if it happened, you can't always give the reasons to show that it did. And so this second person is a sort of skeptical historian. And at points, he wonders whether this book might not be too conservative. All right, this fellow. The third internal person is a full-blown, I don't know what you want to call it. Skeptic's the wrong word, but this person thinks we don't understand anything at all. In other words, we don't know what gravity is. We don't know what electrons are. We don't know what consciousness is. We don't really know metaphysically, ontologically, the nature of God, the soul. This person thinks everything in the world is really mysterious. So some people talk about apophatic theology.
Okay, so that's a long answer. He's basically saying, yes, I believe in the body's resurrection, but there's many reasons to doubt it. There's so much we don't know. Now, what exactly is Dale Allison's theory, theory of the resurrection? Or how does he summarize what he thinks happened? By the way, he gives a great naturalistic explanation for the resurrection. I'll play that later.
List several, and maybe these will be the main ones. This is what comes to mind. The first thing is that I think resurrection belief goes back to week 1, by which I mean the week after Jesus' crucifixion. So you know that there are some reconstructions or some histories of early Christianity which argue that the belief took hold gradually. It required...
Yes, Kendra, this is a very honest, very refreshing Christian New Testament historian who's going to tell you it the way it is, in my opinion. I think he admits a part of the way he views the resurrection is what I played first. It's his spiritual type experiences, and that kind of paints a portrait of how he views the evidence going forwards, and he tries to lower that bias. But yeah, listen to what he thinks what the resurrection is, and maybe after this I'll play what a guy like me would say.
Some time to think and look through the scriptures and meditate and so on. I don't think so. I think this is there from week 1, and I mean literally week 1. I mean within 7 days of the crucifixion, and I give some reasons for that. The second thing is that for me, when the early Christians said Jesus rose from the dead, I believe that they were thinking in eschatological categories. And here, maybe your listeners need to know that I don't have the same view of eschatology that NT Wright
has,
Tom Wright has. And so I think for them, the resurrection of Jesus was the beginning of the general resurrection, the start. I think that lies behind Paul's use of first fruits. I think it lies behind the passage, or at least how it would be understood, the passage of Matthew 27 about the saints rising from the dead. I think this is real eschatology, by which I mean end of the present age stuff. So that's a second thing. I don't think some people have argued that's a later idea, that maybe even Paul invented this. I think this is also week 1 stuff. This is somehow end of the world stuff. As far as things such as, the events that happened, I say that my conclusions, at one point I say my conclusions are embarrassingly antediluvian, by which I mean I end up agreeing with the basic memories that I see in the New Testament. In other words, I think some guy named Joseph of Arimathea buried Jesus and that people knew where it was.
Okay, that's interesting to note. Because I think historians are divided on that one.
I think the tomb was empty. Jesus's body was gone on Sunday. Okay, those are conservative conclusions. I think that Mary Magdalene was probably the first to see the risen Jesus and to report it. And I think Peter had a vision of Jesus or an encounter with the risen Jesus after that, and so on. So you can see why
He sounds very similar to Mike Licona here, right? But hang on to your shorts.
within my context, within my higher, within my context, those are conservative conclusions, right? And some of my friends won't know what to make of this, and will, I just won't know what to make of it. But let me say this: there's also a theme that runs through this, and so you will like what I just said. Those conservative conclusions, but apologists won't like.
Well, this will be good.
A theme that runs through this book, which is how little we know. So I come back to this again and again and again. So you take the appearance to the 500. You just ask any question, and you don't know the answer. Who were these people?
Don't know.
Were they in the south? Were they in the north? Were they in Galilee? Were they in Jerusalem?
Don't know.
I think myself that about the only thing we can know is that, or say is probable, is that it's post-Pentecostal. I can't imagine a crowd of 500 being gathered before the public proclamation.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what he means by antediluvian here. Because, yeah, that means before the flood. Maybe he just means antiquated. I don't know.
Of the resurrection at Pentecost. So I think this is a post-Pentecostal crowd. But what they saw, how many of these people?
Post-Pentecostal crowd. This is an important note. So he's saying, part of me thinks that these were like Pentecostals today. They were very superstitious. They were very just in love with the Spirit and very susceptible to persuasion and experiences, and might have said they saw something that they really didn't see, but basically they did see it, but not in the sense that you would see a person walking down the street.
Knew Jesus really well. How did they see him? Really, how did they see him? 500 people, that's a lot. Now it's got to be an approximation, but was there a receiving line? Was there a jumbotron?
Exactly, because doesn't the creed hint that this was all happening at one time? But maybe it wasn't at one time. But still, if all 500 were to, this is what I always say, if all 500 were to go the same sketch artist, and the sketch artist say, please describe the physical description of Jesus Christ. Go. And then he starts drawing. Would we have 500 similar sketches? These are questions that should keep Christians awake at night.
Some of the church fathers actually think this must have been something like Acts, a heavenly vision. So he's somewhere up in the clouds, and they can see him at one.
Oh, by the way, Aaron, stay tuned, because it's like I'm looking in the mirror. I have a little more hair than Dale, and I don't have I'm clean shaven. But it's like I'm looking in the mirror with Dale, because he talks about Mormonism. It's like, instead of no, I shouldn't say that.
Anyway, my point is that I don't know.
He just says a lot of the same things I say, and I've never read or really even I've heard of Dale Allison, but just from my Bible geek buddies who talk about him. But it's like he says a lot of the same things I've been saying for years.
The answers to any of these questions, I can't name a single person who was there. Can't name a single person who was there.
And I almost think, if I interrupt you.
Now here comes Mike Licona to save the day, because he knows there's going to be a lot of evangelical type Christians who are listening to this and say, I don't like to hear these things.
Just a little here. I think some of those, they are interesting questions, and certainly a lack of knowledge there. But I wonder if some of these just concern you too much. We
see, and he laughs like I laugh. It's like a evangelical Christian apologist / historian says, maybe this just you're thinking too much about this stuff. Just let it go, Dale. Just let it go. Sure, we don't know, but it's not a big deal.
We have a few accounts of Caesar's crossing the Rubicon, and both Lucan and Suetonius tell us how when Caesar paused, there was an apparition there at the Rubicon, and he was, this apparition was, Caesar was there with another.
Mike, do you believe that there was a real apparition at the Rubicon? Maybe he does and says it was Satan.
Number of his leaders and soldiers, but none of the names of the leaders or soldiers are mentioned. Yeah, that's just a lack of knowledge. It doesn't really, hurt us.
But do you believe it, Mike? Do you believe that historical record that there was apparition during that time at that place? Because the book says so?
No.
Okay. So, whoa. So, I'm not saying this wasn't a real event. I'm just saying I don't know its content. So we also have Constantine telling.
If you don't know its content, how can you say, well, okay, he's saying, I don't know if this isn't a real event.
And Eusebius that he and his army saw a cross in the sky. So what is that? What happened? What really happened? It's from an eyewitness according to Eusebius. I don't know what happened. I think there's a real something. But look, maybe the Corinthians knew more about this than we do. That's quite possible. On the other hand, I'm struck that Paul does not say, he appeared to the 500, among whom are, Fred and Jane, whom you know well. And
yes. Now, here's a simple question for Christians to consider. Would your confidence go up just a scotch if Paul had said within the creed, Jesus appeared to 500, such as, and gave a list of like 10 names from so-and-so, Myron from so-and-so. Oh, I shouldn't bring up Myron's name, bad memories. But, specific names. Come on, wouldn't it just help beef up the creed a little bit? This is my strategy, and I'm like, full disclosure, my goal here is to lead the young Christian children, youth to hell. So now you know that I'm an honest guy. This is my strategy with prophecies. Couldn't the prophecies be better if they would have inserted this and this? You can do the same thing with the creed.
Doesn't do that. Did these people go around the Mediterranean giving their testimonies?
But it is oral tradition, right? I mean, we have an oral formula or two of them that are being cited by Paul here.
Yeah, yes, but see, I don't. So you could say thousands saw Mary.
Here we go.
Let's say thousands saw the sun dance at Fatima in Portugal, right?
How many videos? I've made at least couple of videos, at least 2 videos at least, where I talk about how Protestants most of them I think, don't believe the miracle of the sun that the Roman Catholics hold up.
1918? Okay, that's it. So what really happened? The fact that we have a sentence there and that I actually think something happened doesn't tell us what it was.
Right.
I actually remember, and so I don't argue this in the book, but I say, how could anyone show it's not the case? I remember in high school, a friend of mine handing me a picture of Jesus in the clouds, right? And
if Camille's here, he's going to love this. Remember Camille's theory of the naturalistic explanation for the resurrection? Pareidolia, however you pronounce it. It's people seeing what they want to see, like you see in the clouds often.
It was a cloud formation that looked kind of like Jesus, and he was passing it around as proof that, Jesus is still around. Actually, just this week, I saw online some story about a Marian apparition, and she was in the clouds, and it was filmed, and I looked at it, and I just thought, those are clouds. I don't think that's Mary.
Did you hear what he just said? That there's people alive today who see Jesus, but it's in the clouds. If there are people alive today in the technological age, in the age of reason, in the age of science that can see Jesus in the clouds, why can't 500 superstitious first century Palestinian type people see Jesus in the clouds as well? Well, because the Gospels say that he ate fish. We'll get to that.
So, if you have 500 people, again, I don't know what happened at all. That's my point. I don't know what happened. Maybe somebody worked them into a fervor, like at an evangelistic service. If it's after Pentecost, the people have to know people have already seen Jesus. Maybe he appeared. Maybe somebody said, oh, look, he's in the clouds. And who knows? Maybe he was in the clouds, but maybe he wasn't in the clouds. I'm just saying, as an historian, I don't know what to do with this. Again, just give me just one more example. So, what do you do with James, the story of James? Well, he saw Jesus. Okay, that's fine. But when did he see Jesus? Did it convert him? I see no reason that we have knowledge about when this took place. Now, since James doesn't show up until the middle of Acts, I'm thinking it's probably later. I'm thinking he probably already knows about the Christian claims, and for all I know, he'd already become a Christian.
He's in the upper room at Pentecost when they're all praying. His mother, his brothers, his sisters are there with the disciples, right?
So when does he see Jesus? I don't know.
Probably been before then.
How do you know?
Well, you can't for sure, but I mean, it just seems like that might be the most plausible.
There you go. There you go. So I'm trying to play historian. Did
Yeah,
he also
but me too. We're talking about the
Yes, that was my German Shepherd dog. It basically, whenever a fan tries to break into my house, it destroys the fan. So
difference between plausibility. We don't have to know things with certainty. We're just what seems the most plausible thing, or what seems reasonable to a reasonable place to put the appearance.
Okay, so would you also
reasonable place to put the appearance? Maybe the appearance didn't happen at all.
Posit an appearance to Mary, his mother, who's also there? Why is she there?
No, well, of course, I would look and say, well, the gospel seemed to suggest that none of Jesus' brothers were followers of Jesus during his lifetime. You've got the text in Mark which says they thought he was beside himself. You've got, as John Meyer points out, even though he doesn't put a whole lot of weight behind it, he says that, you've got Jesus entrusting the care of his mother at the cross to the beloved disciple.
By the way, there's an edit in here that I really want to know what Mike Licona edited out. It's coming up soon.
Why not to one of Jesus' brothers? Well, because they probably weren't followers of Jesus at that time, right?
Okay, so we probably don't want to go too much further into this, but
oh yeah, good point. Highways and byways. That could have been Dale Ellison at my door. Oh man, I hope he's still alive.
I don't see any reason to read Paul into James, and I think that's what's happening. You can become a believer or a Christian without seeing the risen Jesus, and I simply don't know what James' story was. The appearance could come later. It could come before. I'm not denying that his experience was like Paul's. I'm simply saying I don't know what it is. So these questions haunt me.
By the way, don't leave. The best is coming. Part 3 is where Dale Ellison basically talks like me.
And they're there.
That was very narcissistic. The best is coming. Dale Ellison sounds like Pinecreek. Stay tuned.
Every turn, they're there at every turn. So that's a motif in the book, that you can ask questions of these texts, and they turn out in many ways to be what I would call thin. They don't have thick descriptions, and they don't carry a lot of data with them. The 500 just isn't there when I ask about it.
This also reminds me of Laura Robinson. It's like when she was debating Mike Licona, it's like, what do we really have here? What do we really have here with Paul? We have Paul. That's it. We don't have 500. We have Paul saying there was 500, but we don't have the 500. They're testimonies.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Maybe a couple of other things. Again, some of your hearers may not like this.
Here comes the edit.
But, one of my historical critical conclusions is that the story in Matthew 27:51 through 53 is not history. So you would agree with that.
That's that's the zombies. No offense to Christians. That's the people coming out of their graves.
Matthew thought it was, and if
but that what he just says the key point. Now I don't know how Dale Ellison knows this, but the key point here is the author of the book of Matthew did think that people came out of the graves and walked around Jerusalem, according to Dale Ellison.
You would agree with that, but I've argued that Matthew thought it was. And if Matthew thought it was, that means you have what you could only call fiction in the canonical stories.
Here's a New Testament historian saying that there is fiction contained in the Gospels. I ask this question a lot of Christians. Give me one example. I love it when Christians almost brag. Oh, I'm not an inerrantist, Doug. No, I don't. I'm not like those fundamentalist people. Don't be crazy. I'm not an inerrantist. And I say, oh, you're not? Okay. Give me an example of something that the Bible just states like it's a historical. It's not a parable or anything like that. Just it reads like it's historical that you personally think didn't happen in the past. Name one. And they're like, most of them, not all of them. Most of them are like, well, I can't think of anything. Oh, really? And you call yourself, you're not a inerrantist. You're a more nuanced Christian who really tackles and views all the. And when I ask questions about, can you rank claims? Which New Testament claims are you're more confident in? Which ones you're least lower confidence in? Well, I don't know. Like if you don't know answers to those questions quickly, because it tells me you've thought about them if you can answer quickly. let me help you. You should say that your confidence is high that Jesus died by crucifixion as compared that Jesus appeared to 500 in 1 Corinthians 15. There's a good, you can take that one free of charge. That's a good example of how you should answer when someone asks you that type of question. Why? Because the historical method says if you have two or more independent sources, you should raise your confidence in it. And if you don't, you lower it. 500 only mentioned once.
Themselves. And then I guess you asked me about historical critical conclusions, right? So yeah. I guess this is the last thing I'll say. And it's just a
so there was, I missed it.
In the canonical, what you could only call.
Okay, now watch this. This is maybe hypercritical of me, but Dale Allison just admits that there's fiction in the Gospels, and then I think there's an edit cut.
Fiction in the canonical stories themselves. And then
you're right there.
You asked me about historical
critical
conclusions, right? So yeah. I guess this is the last thing I'll say. And it's just a puzzle. So not only am I embarrassingly antediluvian when it comes to some of the stories, but I think that the passion predictions are based on things Jesus said.
Yeah, see, this is something that's really going to bother Christians, because just for the people who might be catching up here, he's going to explain that some of the things you read in the Gospels is not really self-fulfilling prophecy. But if there was a guy named Jesus who said these things, like I will die and I will on the third day raise again, and even if that didn't happen in history, the people who followed Jesus could write that it did, because, well, that was in their heads. But Mike Licona has a good, it's coming.
But I don't understand why this is a plus for apologists. I don't understand why this isn't a plus for polemicists, even though I haven't seen them take it up. So here is what I would say if I...
Yeah, Camille Greger has talked about this often, Dale Allison. So, yeah, we have taken it up, at least some of us.
Or a skeptic, which I am not. But if I were a skeptic, I would say, well, Jesus prophesied catastrophe and redemption. He prophesied tribulation and vindication. He prophesied death and resurrection. And maybe he did these things because he was thinking eschatologically. But we do know from history that sometimes groups have taken prophecies that were not fulfilled, at least to everybody who doesn't belong to the group, and claimed that they were fulfilled. So you may...
I don't think Christians disagree with that, do they? Now, why can't that be the case for Jesus? Because the Bible's special.
Know that the Seventh-day Adventists actually come from a group in the middle of the 19th century whose leader had prophesied the coming of Jesus, prophesied it once, nothing happened, prophesied it again, and a small group of people said, well, he did come again. It was an invisible coming. It took place in the heavens, and so on. So why are the passion predictions being historical good news? Why aren't they ammunition for the skeptic who says, well, maybe somebody stole the body? And then people said, well, Jesus prophesied death. He was right. He prophesied resurrection. Well, he's right about that.
Yeah, so here's a naturalistic explanation. It's not the one I would use, but maybe this is a better one because Christians can almost swallow this one better because you're keeping more of the story intact. So here's a naturalistic explanation for the resurrection.
Maybe somebody stole the body. And then people said, well, Jesus prophesied death. He was right. He prophesied resurrection. Well, he's right about that too. Anyway, you can see where a skeptic could go here, and I have a whole chapter on this. I end up disagreeing with the skeptics, but I think it's a really complex matter. Once you look at some comparative religious materials, there really are a lot of people who have said such and such happened when to everybody else outside it didn't happen. So I think apologists need to revisit this, the meaning of the passion predictions. So I hope that chapter. By the way, I should say that one of my goals here is just to help the discussion along. I hope that's not too presumptuous. If arguments are bad or they need to be improved, then...
Okay, there was one other interesting thing. It's a bit of an aside, but at around 28 minutes, Licona mentions how William Lane Craig contradicts himself. I just want to play that. I admit it's an aside, and I don't know why they were talking about it. I guess it's just holding beliefs that are often in tension with one another, so you can believe that the historical method does not provide enough oomph to believe a man rose from the dead, however, still believe it. And I think that was the context. But here's Licona giving William Lane Craig a hard time.
deal with this? And he says, I know there's a tension there, and I just hold both of these positions, and I can't reconcile them at this point. But yeah, I appreciate the fact that you're willing to wrestle. How do you deal with this? But on the other hand, he embraces an A theory of
Yeah, here it is.
findings in Christian apologetics. Then that's great. But if I can't, well, that's fine with me too. I'm willing to hold some things in tension. And I know William Lane Craig feels the same. Once I asked him about, he rejects open theism, but on the other hand, he embraces an A theory of time. And I remember asking him, I said, Bill,
Yeah, for most people, well, I shouldn't say most people, but for a lot of people, what is he talking about? Open theism basically says God cannot see the future because the future doesn't exist yet. God can only know what's knowable, just like he can only do what's doable. God can't do certain things because it goes against his nature, or cannot do logical contradictions and so forth. And in the same way, God can't know certain things because Pinecreek's choice has not been made yet. How can God know the future of a choice that does not yet exist? But if you believe a theory of time, that we have sequential events, then how can you say God knows the future and hold to a theory of time? You should be an open theist then, if you believe that we have sequential events and the future hasn't happened yet until it unfolds. So I just thought that was funny. Okay, part 3 was the most interesting part, and Mike Licona even admits that it's going to be the hardest section for Christians to swallow. Just seeing if there's anything else in part 1. Nah, not really. Not that interesting. And I already played some parts of part 3 where basically Dale Allison admits that part of the reason why he believes that a God exists is all personal, well, I shouldn't say all, is personal experience. But I want to also play a part in part 3 here where he talks about the flying man, which I found it really made me smile. Let's see, I'll back it up to about here.
Proceedings, over 100 people testified that they saw this guy levitate, go off the ground, not a half inch, not an inch, but really get up there. Okay. And this
so what this is the context. Hey, Christians, listen up. You believe a man rose from the dead based on these eyewitness accounts? Well, we got eyewitness accounts all over in history saying a lot of strange things happened. Do you believe those too? No. Do you believe it? Not that these, do you believe it? And I bet most Christians say, no, I don't. And the Christians who do say they believe it, they will often revert to, well, this is demons, or maybe it is God, but if it's in other religious contexts, it's probably demons, because demons want to pull people away from Christianity. And Dale Allison will talk about that excuse coming up and how pathetic it is.
This included a pope. This included bishops. This included some Protestants who were skeptical. It included lots of people. All right. So let's just say this happened. Let's say that this funny little friar occasionally would pop off the ground. By the way, it always happened when he was in some sort of meditative state. So who did this? Well, Roman Catholic tradition says God did it. God made him fly. Okay.
God
he flew.
The flying man.
He's the patron saint of pilots, airplane pilots. I think that's really true. Anyway, who did this? It's really hard for me to think that God just, every now and then said, let's raise Joseph off the ground. This will be fun. If this happened, I don't know what the cause is. I don't know what the explanation is. Maybe it's some hidden, latent, weird human ability. I simply don't know. But if these, again, hypothetically, if these things took place, they took place when he was praying. They took place when he was in church. He was a very pious person. The context is nothing but religion, nothing but Roman Catholicism several centuries ago.
Okay, so this is a great point, because often when I bring up the flying man, a lot of Christians will go to, oh, but what's the religious context? Why would God do something like this? Why would God make your great ancestor fly? There has to be some reason why God would do this. Well, here's a situation where I think this is in the 18th century, 17th century, I forget, where within a Roman Catholic context, a friar levitated, and not just a few inches, like went way up. And there's, according to the historical documents, a lot of witnesses saw this. Do you believe it? Number one. Number two, this is in a religious context, and it's a Christian context. Do you still believe it? Like, are you more likely to say this is Satan now? But it's Roman Catholicism, and most people listening right now are Protestants, I think. Protestants, do you believe it? In the why aren't you a Roman Catholic? If Jesus being risen from the dead points to Christianity as true, isn't a man levitating in a Roman Catholic context evidence that maybe Roman Catholicism is true?
So who did it? So for me, the question is always, did something happen? One. Two, who or what was the agent? And for me, actually, the question of agency is more difficult than the question of miracles, because I actually, I think Craig Keener's book has some stories in it. The big 2-volume miracle thing.
Sure.
It has some of those stories I think I can explain away as a
some or most
critical historian, but some of them are really interesting. I have no reason to doubt all of them that seem to break natural law, for example. And I've seen things in my own experience and in my immediate family that break natural law, or what we call natural law.
And this is why I think he's more likely to accept the historical account that Jesus rose from the dead. Or maybe he doesn't, and he just believes it on, how should I say, faith reasons?
So for me, this is just an empirical question. One, agency, that's a real problem. Okay.
Robert Wilford says, saw someone try to use your flying man on the Muslim channel. They didn't do it very well. I know exactly what you mean. Someone tried to do the poof or drown to Mike Turek and kind of messed it up. Yeah. You have to be very careful on how you set things up. Basically, you got to know your audience, know who you're talking to, and foresee any accusation they could put against it before it happens, and state it in such a way that they can't use those accusations.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. Sometimes the work of the historian, that's where it ends. It's did the event occur? That's where it ends. It's like with the resurrection of Jesus. I think the historian, as you do, the historian can conclude that Jesus rose from the dead. But that's where the work of the historian.
See, okay, look at his face. I don't think Dale Ellison agrees with what Mike Licona just said. Watch Dale Ellison's face here.
I think the historian, as you do, the historian can conclude that Jesus rose from the dead. But that's where the work of the historian stops. We don't have the tools to ascertain that God did it, or whether an alien in a parallel universe faked this and made Jesus rise in order to deceive humans into thinking that Jesus is God's son, and therefore he gets his PhD in this parallel universe. I mean, because he was able to accomplish his goal. That's something. I mean, we can have our opinions as historians, but we don't have the tools to be able to affirm or confirm one and not the other. My thing is, when I talk about the religio-historical context, is to say it's more likely that what we have on our hand is a miracle rather than an anomaly. And that's saying that the event occurred, assuming, like you said, the event occurred. It's a miracle rather than an anomaly. Or we could even just say it's a supernatural event and not identify God as the cause. It could be an alien. It could be some kind of a demon or an angel doing it. But if we assume that the event occurred, the way we distinguish it as a miracle from an anomaly is to say it occurred in a context charged with the religious significance. And that's what I'd say about this saint that you mentioned.
Okay. All right. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I think
Yeah. I think I know why Dale responded that way. I think Dale disagrees with a lot of what Mike just said.
I know you criticized me for that in the book, and understood where you were coming from. That's just my answer to your criticism.
Okay. All right. Maybe we'll come back to that.
Yeah. And I'm glad.
See, and this is a perfect example of Dale Ellison choosing his battles, and he chose not to battle there.
Glad you did interact with some of my work on there. And I think you did a fair-minded treatment of all this. So, all right, you have the section of your book entitled "Thinking with Parallels." I mean,
this is a great section. It's basically parallels I use parallels often. With the flying man, I try to use the exact evidence that we have for the resurrection. But in other things, like they mentioned Craig Keener's book. There's many miracles in Craig Keener's book from people who are still alive today that we can go talk to, that we can go investigate. Yet I have a sneaking suspicion that many Christians would not believe a lot of those miracle claims or very easily come up with naturalistic explanations. Am I wrong? I don't think I'm wrong. And yet, they're less likely to come up with naturalistic explanations for something 2,000 years ago, these miraculous claims in the New Testament. Why? When the evidence is better today, they doubt it. Evidence worse, they don't doubt it. Does that make any sense at all? It doesn't. Which gets back to the very beginning of this live stream, the real reason why I think most Christians believe what they believe. Personal experiences.
This is a challenging section to challenge me. Well, what are you up to there?
So I think the easiest way to do this is just to introduce one of the chapters. So one of the chapters is called something like Seeing Mary. And I focus on sightings, alleged sightings of the Virgin Mary in Zaytun, Egypt, that started in 1968. Now, I think this is a fascinating phenomenon. And what happened is, over a period of literally months, there was, I think it was St. Mary's Orthodox Church in Zaytun, Egypt, which is a suburb of Cairo. On the dome of this church, there was a figure of light. And this figure of light was seen by literally hundreds of thousands of people. The crowds were gigantic. And
100,000 beats 500,
it
right?
was seen by Christians. It was seen by Muslims. It was seen by journalists. It was seen by people who didn't have any
Whoa! It's seen by different cultures, different biases?
religious beliefs. And the crowds thought it was Mary. Now, this really happened. It's not a legend. It's not a myth. Actually, here in New Jersey, I live in Princeton. Here in New Jersey, there are lots of Coptic Christians who were in Cairo in the 1960s. And I had a student interview a bunch of them for a paper he wrote. We have lots of firsthand testimony. This was also investigated by the Orthodox Church. I know the grandson of the hierarch who did the investigation. This is not a legend. It's not a myth. Okay, so this event is, in my judgment, unexplainable in conventional terms. Actually, the city officials wondered if it couldn't be some sort of weird light show, and they cut off electricity to that neighborhood. The lights were still there. They were trying to figure out what the heck is going on. The church authorities investigated, and the Coptic
They cut off the electricity and the electricity was still there?
Orthodox
Maybe the switch was broken.
authorities said, we think this is Mary up there. All right. So here's the problem. In this chapter, I talk about this event, and then I look at some of the explanations for it. One, of course, is that this is the Blessed Virgin Mary. Then there are some people who've tried to explain it in terms of earthquake, lights, fault lights, and all sorts of other options. And I give reasons why nothing makes any sense. Okay? So I can draw lessons from this. My first lesson is that I believe that there are inexplicable events in the world, things that historians and reasonable people can look at and say, wow, I don't know what that is. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. That's one thing. The second thing I can do with this is I can say, well, this is actually a word of caution because
Ooh, okay, this is a really good part. If you're dozing off right now, listen to this.
the second thing I can do with this is I can say, well, this is actually a word of caution because I'm not sure how to explain this, but I think I know a lot more about these appearances than the appearances in the New Testament.
He's describing something that happened in Egypt in 1960, I think, in that area of time. And the evidence is better than the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. And yet, I think most Christians would not believe that this has anything to do with the supernatural. And, well, specifically, nothing to do with Mother Mary. The Protestants, at least, would believe that. But yet the evidence is better.
Again, we have some photos. Maybe they've been doctored a little bit. I don't know, but we have some photos. We have tons of firsthand testimony. This is a real thing. It's real. And I don't know what to make of it. So
we have photos, eyewitness testimony, and I still don't know what to make of it, which means I don't know. He's agnostic about it. And he's saying, but, I don't believe that this is necessary from a God. I don't think he's saying that. He's saying, I don't know. Dale Allison, why don't you say, I don't know what the resurrection, when the evidence is worse? Because you had an experience when you were a kid or teenager.
Some caution, given the abundance of testimony and the fact that I still don't know, isn't that caution for the New Testament, about which we know no less? But here's a third lesson from this, and this actually has to do with worldview. So if you talk to Coptic Christians, they'll tell me, what's wrong with you, Allison? So this was seen by hundreds of thousands of people. It was photographed. People said it looked like Mary. There were these little light doves flying around. There were all sorts of healings that went on there at the site.
Healings.
The city officials tried to figure out what was happening. They came up with no explanation. All the explanations of the skeptics are bogus. What's wrong with you, Allison? Get on board. This is Mary. Okay. Now, I'm a skeptic. I suppose it's in part because I'm a Protestant, and it's just kind of hard for me to think this was really Mary.
Because he's a Protestant, it's hard for him to believe it's Mother Mary. Now, is the reverse true? Because we had followers of this man Jesus, that it's easy to believe he rose from the dead? Something to ponder.
That's maybe part of it. Part of it is, I think, that the testimony makes me think this was a little mechanical, and that bothers me. There's also no verbal communication of any sort. So there are these little things that bother me. But here's the point. Looking at it from the point of view of a Coptic Christian, this is Mary, and anyone who doesn't see this is just blind. But I'm standing up.
Oh, what does that remind you of? I mean, this reminds me of evangelical Christians saying, well, just look at the evidence. I mean, like, if you can't see that Jesus rose from the dead from the historical record, you're just blind. By Satan.
Outside and looking at this and saying, you know what, this helps me understand the skeptic of the New Testament accounts a little better.
Ah, there you go.
Even though I don't have a story, I'm not willing to go there. This actually teaches me something about worldviews and how hard they are to break, how difficult they are to break. What's wrong with me? I think I'm being a little bit like the skeptic of the resurrection when I'm not willing to say, it's Mary. Come on, wake up. What's wrong with you? So
kudos to Dale Allison to recognize that parallel. He sees in himself that he's less likely to believe in Roman Catholic type claims. So maybe he should lower his confidence on something he wants to believe as a Protestant, or as a Catholic as well, but definitely as a Protestant, that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. Maybe he's doing the same thing, but in an opposite way. He just desires to believe this, just like he desires not to believe in the Roman Catholic claims, which says Roman Catholicism is true.
That's one of the things. That's another lesson that I pull out of it. So that's the kind of thing I'm doing. I'm looking at parallels. I'm not saying that looking at a parallel like this isn't explaining away anything in the New Testament. It's just a way of thinking about what happened. So that's what I mean by thinking with parallels, looking at.
Yeah, he's putting that caveat in there. I'm not explaining away the New Testament, the resurrection evidence.
Visions of Mary in this case, and asking, does this teach us anything? Can we learn anything about the New Testament from this? So that's one example. Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So now come to you have a chapter titled "Rainbow Body," and I found.
Yeah, I didn't know what rainbow bodies were, but apparently some Buddhist, I think, bodies, monks shrink after they die. Immediate thought I had was dehydration, duh. But they think it's some type of miracle. You can actually find pictures of it if you Google rainbow bodies. But there was something later on when they talk about it that I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. Go ahead and tell us what are rainbow bodies?
A few days of their death. Some of these traditions say that, some hair and fingernails were left. That's all. Weirdly enough, very weirdly enough, there are also people who sort of shrink halfway and stop. And by the way, I'm like you, Mike. I really don't have any idea what to make of this stuff. But there are pictures online of some Buddhist masters who are dead, and they look like they've shrunk, and they're in their clothes.
They look like they've shrunk. They look like they. We have something simple called a measuring tape. And with a measuring tape, you can actually know if they shrunk. It's so tough to be science-minded in this day and age of superstition. Like, if you believe that the rainbow bodies is a real thing from some type of spiritual force that's shrinking monks, before you put them in the coffin, take a measuring tape and measure their femur. And then come back a couple months later, measure their femur again with a measuring tape. Not just, it looks like they shrunk. Well, of course they're going to look like they shrunk because they're losing water and they're dehydrating and they're decaying.
And their clothes are way bigger than they are. I don't know. I don't have any idea what to do with this. But
honey, I shrunk the priest.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in Tibetan Buddhism, this is a part of leaving the world. Or can be part of leaving the world. And it's called Rainbow Body because read a biography that was written within a year or two of one of these fellows passing. The Dalai Lama, in an interview, meant this. And then I say, after I've documented this tradition, I say, I don't know what to make of it. And I actually don't think I'm qualified to have an opinion because I don't know the Tibetan literature. I'm not an expert on Buddhism. I've never been to Tibet, and so on and so on. I'm just an amateur looking in and saying this is really interesting. But then what I do is I ask some questions. I ask, for example, what would this mean if all this is bunk? That is, if all of this is not true. We have eyewitnesses making claims about disappearing bodies in the modern world. How does that happen? The skeptics would be delighted to find out that this is all bunk, right? Mm-hmm. Well, but what happens if it's not all bunk? What happens if occasionally, I'm just being open-minded, right? Apologists are always telling us to be open-minded about, telling skeptics, you got to keep an open mind here. Okay, so I'm trying to have an open.
They're called rainbow bodies because apparently there's another miracle that after or while, I don't know, the body shrinks, a rainbow appears. This is so easily verifiable. This is no big mystery.
Open mind. What if this occasionally happens? What would it mean? So the chapter then looks at the options, at the alternative.
But yet it hasn't been verified.
I don't commit myself to anything. Well, what I do say is that
let's look at those 6 options.
Okay, so here's 6 options for the rainbow bodies, apparent miracle in Buddhist tradition. And the thing is, you can apply these 6 explanations to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So here we go.
Okay, for a second, because I think they're interesting. So those 6 interpretations of the phenomena that to which you appeal are: number 1, could be fiction and or misperception. Number 2,
that's the one I go with when I'm evaluating the resurrection. Most of the New Testament, in my opinion, is fiction, especially the Gospels.
It could be the phenomena could be real, and the cause is Satan or demons.
Yep.
But and you point out how we look at that. I think in Revelation where it says the Antichrist will be raised from the dead. Plus in Egypt, you had the magicians when Moses did some of the things. They turned their own staffs into snakes, and then Moses turned his into a snake that ate the others.
Isn't that where we get the symbol for medicine today? The staff with the snakes wrapped around. Isn't that from Moses?
So, I mean, we can, according to scripture, that would say that Satan or the forces of darkness can actually do these supernatural things. So I admit, though, that for us to say, well, these rainbow bodies, that's Satan doing this to deceive the Buddhists, that does seem ad hoc. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, it does seem ad hoc. Does it seem ad hoc when apologists talk about miracles in other religions to defend Christianity? I mean, isn't that an ad hoc worldview explanation within your worldview?
The other thing is that this argument bothers me for any number of reasons, but one simple reason is what people did with Jesus. This is what they do with Jesus in Matthew 11. This is what they do with him in Mark 3. They say, I'm sorry, Matthew 12 and Luke 11. They say, well, he casts out demons. Look at that. Must be the devil. I'm really hesitant to take that rhetorical move, make that rhetorical move for any number of reasons. But also, you're right. It's ad hoc. It's easy. It's cheap. Everything that doesn't fit what you believe, you can explain away that way.
Everything. He says it perfectly. How does he say it?
It's easy. It's cheap. Everything that doesn't fit what you believe.
Everything that doesn't fit what you believe can be explained that way. To say Satan did it. You listening, Braxton Hunter? You need to learn some things from Dale Allison, Braxton Hunter. Because that's what I think Braxton Hunter's favorite scapegoat. I can explain all these miracle claims in other world religions. Satan! And then you got the Pentecostals. I can explain why you got cancer. Satan! I can explain why you have these lustful thoughts and want to watch pornography. Satan!
Can explain away that way. And so also... Yeah. Well, I'll just leave it at that. Okay? So that's not an option for me.
So number 1, fiction and or misperception. Number 2, Satan or demons. Number 3, the phenomena is real. It's just the cause is unknown. Number 4, the phenomena is real, but it's attributed to either the Christian God, the Hindu deity, Buddhist power, or a transcendent reality that's imperfectly revealed in different religions.
Yeah, see, and this is a great tactic that a lot of atheists use when Christians like Braxton Hunter say, well, yeah, I admit there's miracles in Buddhism and Hinduism, but that's Satan. That's not the real God doing it. Then a Hindu could say, well, yeah, I agree Jesus Christ rose from the dead, but that was Satan who did it, not the true God, Vishnu. You see, you can just flip that around. But Vishnu doesn't exist, Doug. Duh. There you go.
Yeah.
Number 5, the disappearance of corpses is attributed to rainbow body by Buddhists and resurrection by Christians, given their eschatological.
Okay, so I'm going to fast forward it to, because that was the main thing I wanted to show there. This is Dale Allison giving the naturalistic explanation for the bodily resurrection, the claim of the bodily resurrection, or the data we have for the bodily resurrection found in the New Testament.
Really can't verify that God did it. Thoughts?
Well, so I'm not sure I want to go there with you. So I'm more skeptical than you are here. I still think that a worldview is interfering with your judgments as an historian. So let's say that I'm a rational historian, but I don't believe that weird things happen. So here's what I would do if I were that person. I would say, look, Jesus died. He really died. And he was buried. He was buried by Joseph of Arimathea. But we do know that there was a market for bodies, for corpses, for magical recipes. Actually, there are magical papyri that include that have recipes which include, body parts, including parts from people who have died violently. So I think if I were a skeptic, I would say, well, the tomb was empty. That's the story. And it was empty because there were robbers and they came in the night, and that's why the tomb is empty in the morning, because they came at night. And they didn't roll the stone back because they're in a hurry. They're doing something illegal, and so it's going to be empty and the stone is rolled away. And then if I were a skeptic, I would say, well, maybe Mary in mourning, Mary Magdalene, saw Jesus. And if I were a skeptic, I'd say, people see the dead a lot and it's all hallucination. Now, I don't think all visions are hallucinations. That's an important part of my book. I don't believe that. But a skeptic will say that.
And by the way, when you say vision, you're not just saying, some kind of something out of space-time. It could involve that, or it could be like, let's just say the Gospels are correct and Jesus appears to them in bodily form. That would include your definition of vision, right?
Wow, that gets really complicated really fast. Let me just set that aside, okay? Let me just talk.
Yeah, I would say no to that. What's value does the word vision have if it's actually another word synonym for just seeing?
It's the skeptic, okay? So the skeptic is going to say, well, she hallucinated. Okay, let's just say hallucinated, right? But she's going to interpret this in terms of resurrection, because a skeptic could say, well, as Luke 19 has it, they went up to Jerusalem thinking the kingdom of God was going to appear immediately. So she thought that the resurrection was at hand. So she's going to interpret the empty tomb in terms of resurrection, and she's going to think of Jesus as being raised from the dead because she's seen him and the tomb is empty. And then same thing's going to happen to Peter. And then if I were a skeptic, I'd say the 500 probably just saw something in the clouds like people do today.
That's Camille's. Camille, did you steal this from Dale Allison? Shame on you.
And so I think the skeptical historian has an out here. And I actually think it's your worldview that allows you to say, okay, he wrote.
This is Dale Allison admitting that it's not about the historical evidence. Can you hear that? He's saying, no, this is about worldview, where you're coming from. And where Dale Allison is coming from is he had a mystical experience when he was younger, and he talked about several. I played them. And same with Mike Licona. I played the part, I believe, where he said, I know atheism is false. I know it. So that means there is a God. And that means that's more likely Christianity is true, and so on. But here's Dale Allison saying, no, the historian has an out here. We can explain this naturally. We can say that, yes, the body was stolen. We can even grant you there was a tomb. I don't. You can even grant you that Joseph of Arimathea existed. I don't. We can even grant you that there was Peter and Mary who actually existed and walked and talked with Jesus. I can go with that one. And it only takes one or two visions / hallucinations. And they were expecting this to happen because if Jesus said that he would come back and that the kingdom of heaven was nigh and so forth, they had these expectations, these thoughts were in their head. And then you explain the rest of it away by saying it's mostly fiction. It built upon a narrative from the Old Testament. A lot of the things are in parables and even the miracle stories you can pull out. The Elijah and Elisha narrative, there's a lot of similarities in the New Testament. So you don't have to. You can very easily say this is naturalistic phenomenon of people grieving, having these expectations, desiring it to be true, all these things, without invoking a miracle. But if you saw a flying trash can lid, or someone told you they did, or if you saw something disappear in a room and reappear on the other side of the room, well, now we got a whole different ball game. Now we have a reason to believe that this is a miracle, more likely to be a miracle, because you've experienced it yourself. It's a shame guys like me haven't experienced things like that. Like I tell you, Mike Licona believes in the bodily resurrection of Jesus. I'd be more likely to believe it too if in the name of Jesus is lit on fire in front of 252 live stream audience. It's as simple as that. Okay, part 4, I want to get to it quickly. Oh, there's some interesting nuggets in here too. Oh yeah, here's Dale Allison sounding like Pinecreek.
I have to explain the golden tablets. I have to explain why an unlettered person could produce this book.
This is Dale Allison talking about Mormonism.
I have to explain why 3 people swore they held the tablets, and why 8 others, saw them, and why this movement flourished even though, the odds were against it. So a Mormon would say, I think there's one explanation for all those things. God was with Joseph. He was a prophet. You could say God.
You see what he did here? He's giving the minimal facts for Mormonism and saying, well, what explains this? What explains the best is that Mormonism in its core propositions is true. That explains it. This sounds curiously like Christians.
God was with Joseph. He was a prophet. That explains all those things. Since I'm not a Mormon, I actually have 6 or 7 different explanations. It's a scattershot approach. I say, well, Joseph was of this character. This is how I explain the golden tablets, and so on and so on. So I don't think that's unreasonable. But that's off the top of my head. That's how I think I would respond. But I'm not sure. I'd have to give it more thought.
Okay, fair enough. I'll move on from there.
Okay.
At one point in your chapter on rainbow bodies, you answer Gary Habermas's contentions about parallels in an article he wrote several years ago. You say the following, and let me quote: "Since the apostles are preaching the same thing about the resurrection, I don't think it's much of a leap at all to say that they're preaching the same thing, that Jesus was raised bodily, physically from the dead." Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, but I don't think that you've contradicted what I said. What there's a difference
I
between
agree.
there's a difference between an inference, which is what you're making, and eyewitness testimony, which
Yeah, an inference and eyewitness testimony. Okay, the context here is they're talking about Paul again, the creed.
we do not have. And
Except Paul.
except for Paul. But the inference you make, I agree with. I've argued at great length in the book that Paul thought in terms of a physical resurrection. And I've actually argued in the book that this is what we have in Judaism in the first century. That is, people who talked about resurrection typically meant resurrection of corpses or bodies. They were thinking of dust and graves and so on. So I don't disagree with you. My point is that this is an inference, okay?
Okay.
But it's not eyewitness testimony.
Except,
Yeah. What Dale Ellison's saying, this is not eyewitness testimony. We do not have 500 people. We do not have the 12 disciples. We only have Paul saying stuff. Like, the older I get, I'm starting to think that the easiest explanation is Paul's a liar. And liars do go to their grave with their lies.
for Paul.
Except for Paul, but again, he doesn't tell you a whole lot. Acts is
agree.
much more interesting. Acts is much more interesting when it comes to Paul's conversion than Paul is.
Sure. And, you know, I acknowledge here that I may be interpreting your words in a sense through my lens of interacting with skeptics on a regular basis and what they say. All right. So in this sense, you'll be able to correct me, but let me go to my second building block here. The second building block has to do with the Gospels. Now, I know you say here that you don't believe any of the Gospels, and of course, church tradition is that Matthew and John were written by eyewitnesses. Mark and Luke, there's no one that are saying Mark and Luke are eyewitnesses, and you reject the traditional authorship of Matthew and John. So
Dale Ellison does not think anybody who walked or talked with Jesus wrote the Gospel of Matthew or John. And let's be clear, I didn't play this, but in part 1 of Mike Licona's series with Dale Ellison, Mike Licona he exalted Dale Ellison as the primo Matthew historian. The New Testament historian that knows the most about the Gospel of Matthew, I think Mike Licona would say, is Dale Ellison. And Dale Ellison does not think that Matthew, the one who was a disciple of Jesus, wrote the Gospel of Matthew.
You say they're not written by eyewitnesses. But I know from conversation I've had with you in the past, as well as a paper that I attended that you read at SBL in Chicago a few years ago, that although you reject the traditional authorship of the Gospel of John written by John, the son of Zebedee, you do think that one of the evangelist's major sources for that gospel is John, the son of Zebedee. So at least we could say that portions of John's gospel are rooted in eyewitness testimony. And I think you would probably, I don't want to say something that you don't believe here, but I would guess that you think that the synoptics are also to an extent rooted in eyewitness testimony, even if not written by an eyewitness. Are both of those fair assessments?
So anything that's historical in the Gospels has to go back to eyewitnesses. There's no way that it's there otherwise. So yes, I grant that there is material that is descended from eyewitnesses.
Okay.
Okay.
Now,
but
there is material that's descended from eyewitnesses, but that doesn't mean all of it is true.
well, yeah. So let me try this on you. So
hold on a second, because I want to just follow up just a little bit more with this. I'm almost there.
Okay. All right.
So I know that although you are skeptical of the ability of the criteria of authenticity in the historical Jesus, you are skeptical of its ability to yield a whole lot about Jesus. I know you still like the criterion of multiple attestation when we talk about the motive.
This is Mike Licona saying that Dale Ellison is more like me than him. Dale Ellison doesn't believe a lot of this stuff is historical. Let me see if I'm right about that.
You are skeptical of its ability to yield a whole lot about Jesus.
The Gospels he's skeptical that the Gospels can yield a lot about Jesus. In other words, we don't know a lot about Jesus based on the Gospels, based on anything.
I know you still like the criterion of multiple attestation when we talk about the motif. And even if John and Matthew and none of the Gospels, even if it's the case that none of them are written by eyewitnesses, you do have multiple attestation of independent sources in terms of a motif concerning an empty tomb, concerning...
I'm playing this because so many Christians talk about, we have multiple attestation. We have so many people talking about what happened and so forth. So we can be confident that it really happened. And Dale Ellison's going to tame you Christians who say stuff like this.
Bodily resurrected. You've got Jesus. I do think the appearances in Mark, I don't know what happened with Mark's ending and stuff. That's irrelevant for now. But
I paraphrase Grayback. I can play it back again if you want.
But Matthew...
Well, you can play it back yourself.
Luke and John, at least, they see Jesus as someone you could touch, someone who eats or prepares a meal, someone with whom you can converse. And I'm not trying at this point with you to say that, we can trust everything in there that happened as written. But you do have multiple independent sources in terms of a
Mike Licona admitting you can't trust everything in the Gospels?
Motif here. With a bodily raised Jesus, he can do these kinds of things, like you can touch his body, he eats, all that. There's an empty tomb. And that seems to me that is congruent with Paul's view of resurrection, something that happens to the corpse. It's now transformed into an immortal...
Mike needs to learn how to be more concise with his language.
Body. It's the corpse, though, that is physically transformed into that. So here, my bottom line point is this, and I'm sorry it took me a little bit to get there.
Yeah.
My bottom line is this. When I read that paragraph that I did of yours earlier, it seems that you were very pessimistic about the sources. Again, I could be reading that through the lens, having in mind people like Ehrman and so forth, and you may not mean it in exactly the same sense. But I guess I'm just not as pessimistic about those sources giving us what I perceive that you're saying there.
Ugh. That was a struggle to get through, Mike.
Thoughts? Okay,
well, there's a lot to say there. Again, to go back to something I said earlier, I think my conclusions are embarrassingly antediluvian. It's very hard for me to think of myself as a skeptic here, but I don't trust the details of the accounts the way you do. So first of all, I
don't trust the details of the accounts like you do. And how does Mike trust them? The details? Well, I think he believes a lot more in the details than Dale Ellison, but is still less than, let's say, Lydia McGrew.
Say Mark is not irrelevant. I would say that it's the earliest account we have, and we don't know how it ended. I agree that the tomb is empty, and that the text assumes that Jesus exited the tomb, but that doesn't tell me anything about what Mark thought of appearances. Okay, so that's just the first thing. Mark is a blank and irrelevant. The second thing is I'm not sure.
Do you really think he's irrelevant, though?
Yes. I mean, I'm thinking for the appearance tradition, I don't see that he.
That's just science. That's just common sense, because Mark doesn't talk about the appearance tradition.
He doesn't tell you anything. How can he be
Except
relevant?
he anticipates it, right? 1428, 1607.
Yes, he knows of the tradition, but he doesn't give us any details.
Okay.
So I don't know what to do with it. The other thing is that
think of the word incest or incestuous when Dale Ellison talks.
I don't know what to do with what you call multiple attestation of a motif here. I do work with that method sometimes, but in the present case, I am no longer sure that John hasn't heard the Gospel of Luke. So I recently published an article explaining my repentance. So I started out the very first session sharing that I fell in love with this field in part because of C.H. Dodd's historical tradition in the fourth gospel. And for 3 or more decades, he had convinced me. And a number of years ago, I worked through the problem again. And I decided that John had at least heard, maybe who knows how many times. I don't think John writes with the other Gospels in front of him, but I do think John has heard Matthew, and I think he has heard Luke.
Yeah, see, this is why I said think about the word incestuous when you think about multiple attestation in Christianity. It's like, no, you do not have independent sources here. You have Luke and Matthew probably having the book of Mark open in front of them when they wrote. And then you have, as Dale Allison admits, John knowing about the synoptic gospels. And then you have, I don't know if he is about to say this, but then you have all the gospel writers knowing some of the letters of Paul. These are not independent accounts. This is incest. This is like a very close relationship. Now, if we had a gospel found in Central America dated to the 1st century, now we got independence.
And that means that multiple attestation with regard to Jesus eating or being touched may not be there. In other words, that may be something.
We do not. This Dale Ellison's amazing. We do not have multiple attestation of Jesus being touched or eating.
John is getting from Luke. But here's something else. I tend to work by starting out with skeptical presuppositions and trying to find what can persuade me. So, for example, I am on board with the idea, which I explained at great length, that the presence of the women in the story of the empty tomb is, in fact, evidence for it being ancient and historical. And that's because I think it works against the grain of the sources. Again, I decide in this book that there's some historical memory behind the doubt, the motif of doubt, which shows up any number of times. Now, here's the problem. The problem is that with regard to the women and the doubt, I can't come up with a story as to why those things, a good story as to why those things were invented or added later. But with regard to the physicality of the appearances, it makes sense to me that even if those things did not happen, it would not be unexpected to find them in the text because they serve.
Yeah. Did you hear what he just said? If Jesus Christ didn't rise bodily from the dead, these appearances would still not be unexpected to be found in the text. In other words, remember I made a video of me asking Converse Contender a question that he just couldn't answer, or wouldn't answer, didn't understand how to answer. I asked him, how can you explain the evidence we have of the New Testament if Jesus did not rise bodily from the dead? How could we have the New Testament in its form today if Jesus never rose from the dead? Here's Dale Ellison saying,
sense to me that even if those things did not happen, it would not be unexpected to find them in the text because they serve apologetical elements. You know, the Gospel of John is related to 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and there's some sort of interaction with a proto-docetism or something like that. The importance of Jesus physically coming in the flesh is there in John's world. And in Luke, this serves an apologetical motif, that is, Jesus is not a ghost. And of course, that's one of the things people have always said. The disciples saw a ghost or they hallucinated or so on. And I would expect early Christians to come up with a counter to that at some point. So,
yeah, bottom line, Jesus could not have risen from the dead at all, and you could still find these types of stories in the New Testament. He goes on, I think, over here to nail that point home. Let's see if I can find it.
Practiced raises questions for me. So the criterion of multiple attestation, as it's usually used, developed in the 20th century, and it came from people who had rejected the traditional authorship of the Gospels. So people used to say, well, we know there's history here because Matthew wrote Matthew, John wrote John, Mark got it from Peter. But the Germans in the 19th century began to doubt these traditions.
Those Germans.
And so you begin to have in the 19th and 20th century people who want to talk about Jesus, but don't think they have eyewitness accounts. So what they end up doing, among other things, is arguing, well, maybe we have some independent accounts here, right? Maybe we have Q and it's independent of John, and they're independent of Mark, and so on. And I thought about that for a long time, but there are two real big problems here. So first of all, there's a problem for evangelical scholars, because I don't think any of these people are on traditional theories of authorship independent of each other.
Boom, chugga lugga lugga. You got nothing for independence.
So if you think Mark was written by John Mark and Luke by Luke, they are together in Paul's epistles. They're hanging out together. They're talking to each other. And the author of Mark is talking to Paul on the traditional theory, and as well as Peter, and Luke is talking to Paul. They must be sitting around the campfire or the shop talking about these things off and on. And if Mark is getting some of his stuff from Peter, and you think John, the son of Zebedee, wrote John, well, heck, the first few chapters of Acts have...
Is he from Minnesota? Well, heck, you got nothing.
Peter and John hanging out together, spending all sorts of time together. They're also together in Galatians.
What does this sound like? This does remind me of Mormonism. It's like the eyewitnesses of the golden plates. Most of them were family members, people who hung out with each other.
So if you want to... If you have a modern trial, what do you want to have from the witnesses? You don't want them to have post-event contact. You want to have...
Hey, J. Warner Wallace, he agrees with you. You don't want... And this is exactly what J. Warner Wallace and Mike Licona got in a spat about. Yeah, I'll use the word spat, even though that wasn't really a spat. When they were here in Tucson and talking, Apologia has a video on it. I have a video on it that I made prior to Apologia's. And basically... Mike Licona himself is making this point that Dale Ellison's making. It's like we have a situation where we got word for word copying. It's obvious that the Gospels are not independent. And it was written so much later. It just, from a skeptic's point of view, it's screaming collusion. It's like a car accident. And then all the witnesses who saw the car accident, you know, they gather around and say, well, did you see that? Did you see this? Did you see it? Oh, yeah. And then they write their own little spiel about it. And sure, it's still going to be different, but a lot of it's going to be word for word because they have colluded on it. Oh, I'm using the word collusion on the word of God. That's a no-no.
Truly independent witnesses. As far as I can tell, on the traditional theories of authorship, all these people are talking to each other all the time. So they're not truly independent in any way at all.
But Dale, they are with. Let's take what you just said there. But if it's true that they were hanging out with Peter and John, well, I mean, it's kind of like if you and I are having this discussion, and some students are coming up and they say, well, you know, this is what Dale said, this is what Mike said, but still independent sources, even if they were at the same events together.
I don't get that. I don't understand that, because they're spending time together during the ministry after certain events happen. They're spending time together after Jesus is crucified. They're spending time together after Pentecost. They're just hanging out. They're swapping stories. They're
swapping stories. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. But let me. What's the summary of all this? The summary of all this is that you're more likely to believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead if you saw a trash can lid fly off a garbage can, or if you played with a Ouija board. You're more likely to believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead if you saw an object in your house disappear and reappear in another room. You're more likely to believe in the resurrection of Jesus if you have had these mystical, spiritual type experiences. And as Mike Licona says, then you know atheism is false. And then you can start looking at the historical record. And to summarize Dale Ellison, the historical record is incestuous. The New Testament record of Jesus is incestuous. They're swapping stories. That's just what he said. The gospel authors knew each other, or knew the work of each other, knew the work of Paul. And here's the catch. Paul knew the work of the Old Testament. So it's not just the New Testament being incestuous. It's the New Testament borrowing parts that it liked from the Old Testament, either flipping expectations or molding prophecies or whatever to make it fit with what they wanted to promote, which is another word of saying propaganda. Now, before you freak out and say, no, the New Testament isn't propaganda, I have Mike Licona on record saying that it is propaganda, but that doesn't mean it's false. And I agree with that. That doesn't mean it's false, but it's still propaganda. The purpose of the New Testament, as the gospel author of John says, is I write these things that you may know you have eternal life. Actually, I think even Mike Licona says that. I didn't play it though. But when he says the part about he knows atheism is false, he also shortly thereafter mentions that something about his eternal destiny is at stake here. Like, if you're believing that reality is such that things disappear and reappear or float and levitate, and if you're believing that there is this afterlife and there's a bad one and a good one, I tell you, can you see how easy it is for you to deceive yourself into thinking and dupe yourself into thinking that the New Testament is mostly historical and is telling a story of a man who rose from the dead? Can you at least see that you're more likely to believe that? And I'm less likely to believe it if I haven't seen objects do all these things. And I'm not worried about an afterlife because I don't believe it's true. But I have high standards and I have markers that would change my mind. And all you have to do is show me things like this. Historical evidence will not get you there. And it's probably not the reason why you believe. Just like philosophers use philosophical arguments to believe in God, I think Christians used historical evidence, manuscript evidence, all that stuff as a way to build their confidence that what they believe is not crazy. Doug, are you really suggesting there was a collaborative effort behind the Gospels? Dale Allison is. He just said, I just played it. In fact, I can play it again for you, Mitch.
And some students are coming up and they say, well, this is what Dale said, this is what Mike said, but still independent sources, even if... Maybe
you're on my side in here, you're just wanting me to restate the point.
If they were at the same events together.
I don't get that. I don't understand that, because they're spending time together during the ministry. After certain events happen, they're spending time together. After Jesus is crucified, they're spending time together after Pentecost. They're just hanging out. They're swapping stories. They're getting their stories straight, consciously or unconsciously, it seems to me.
Yeah, and earlier on, he basically said that we do not have independent sources in the New Testament. The whole New Testament is incestuous authorship. Which is why people like Lydia McGrew say, well, we have, and Jonathan McClatchy say we have undesigned coincidences. Well, yeah, I can buy some of that, but it's not miraculous undesigned coincidence. It is authors knowing of other authors' works. It really, time and time again, it doesn't matter if you're a philosopher or a historian. It seems like you have these experiences when you're younger. It paints a picture for you on what the world is like, and you're more likely to believe certain things in the future, like a resurrection. And this is Camille's challenge. Find me a historian that converted to Christianity because of the historical evidence for the resurrection. a historian who is a professional historian who has never been a Christian, not backslidden Christian, just also read and studied the New Testament and said, oh, Jesus Christ rose from the dead. Done. Doesn't happen. Does not happen. Never, ever does it happen. Never. Ever. This, someone, a subscriber reminded me of Mike Licona and this topic with Dale Allison on Facebook, so thank you for that. Who was it? Because I've been ignoring Mike Licona for a while. Sorry, Mike. A thousand pine points to Daryl. Thanks, Daryl. My apologies to Dale Allison. He was scheduled to come on my program and defend his views. Same with Mike Licona, but we ran out of time.